Welcome to Bible Stories for Sleep. The scripture tells us, He grants sleep to those He loves. Tonight, let that promise carry you as we walk together through Jacob's ladder at Bethel. If these stories bring you peace, tap subscribe so a new story is always waiting for you. Now release the weight of the day, close your eyes, and let the Word be your rest. The sun has slipped far below the jagged limestone horizon of the Judean hills, leaving behind a deep, bruised twilight of indigo and soft violet that slowly surrenders to the vast, quiet expanse of the night. Here, upon the high plateau north of ancient Luz, the air carries the sharp, clean scent of wild thyme, sun-warmed dust, and the faint, cool moisture of a desert dew beginning to form on the dry stones. There is no sound save for the occasional soft rustle of a night wind sweeping across the sparse scrubland, and the slow, heavy breathing of a lone traveler who has walked until his limbs can carry him no further. Jacob pauses, wiping the sweat and fine white dust from his brow with the back of a trembling hand, feeling the immense weight of the silence closing in around him. Behind him lies Beersheba, and the safety of his mother Rebekah's tent, and the bitter fury of a brother whose birthright he has stolen under the shadow of deception. Ahead lies an unknown road stretching into the distant, unfamiliar plains of Paddan Aram, a perilous journey of hundreds of miles through the territory of strangers and untamed wilderness. He is entirely alone now, stripped of the herds, the servants, and the protective enclosure of his father Isaac's encampment, reduced to a single man with a staff in his hand and a heavy, troubled heart. The shadows lengthen and merge into absolute darkness, swallowing the familiar contours of the landscape until earth and sky seem to dissolve into one another, broken only by the extraordinary brilliance of the desert stars. They hang low and sharp in the thin, high-altitude air, burning like distant embers in a great, silent vault that stretches endlessly overhead. Weariness settles deep into his bones, an ache so profound that every step feels like wading through deep water, and he knows he cannot press on through the treacherous terrain in the dark without stumbling into a ravine or falling prey to the wild predators that roam the wadis by night. He searches the ground with his foot until he finds a small cluster of weathered stones, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, protruding from the earth like ancient ribs of the sleeping land. Bending down with a quiet sigh, he selects a few of these stones, shaping them roughly into a low, hard pillow to cradle his aching head. There is no soft fleece here, no woven blanket of dyed wool, no padded mattress such as he had known in his father's house. There is only the cold, unyielding earth beneath him and the rough, mineral grain of the stone against his cheek. He lies down upon the barren ground, pulling his heavy traveling cloak tightly around his shoulders to ward off the rising chill of the midnight air, watching the slow, majestic rotation of the constellations above. His mind races through the events of the past few days, replaying the hurried departure, the parting words of his mother whispered in the dim light of the tent, and the solemn blessing of his blind father echoing in his ears. Fear mingles with a deep, aching loneliness, a hollow sensation in his chest that reminds him of how utterly vulnerable he is, a fugitive resting upon a patch of barren earth far from everything he has ever known or loved. The stones beneath his head are cold at first, drawing the heat from his temples, but gradually his body warmth begins to seep into the rock, creating a strange, anchoring contact with the ancient terrain. His eyelids grow heavy, weighed down by the sheer exhaustion of flight and the quiet rhythm of the desert night, and his breathing deepens, slowing to match the steady, timeless pulse of the earth around him. The worries of the day, the guilt of the deception, and the anxiety of the uncertain tomorrow begin to drift away, dissolving into the vast, velvety darkness that blankets the hills of Bethel. In the deep hours of the night, somewhere between sleeping and waking, the boundary between the physical world and the unseen realm begins to blur and fade away. Jacob is no longer simply lying upon a pillow of hard stones in the middle of a lonely wilderness. His inner eye opens to a landscape of profound, luminous reality that dwarfs the physical earth. Before him stands a structure of breathtaking magnitude, a vast and glorious ladder, or perhaps a towering stairway of divine architecture, whose base rests firmly upon the dark soil where he sleeps. The foot of this magnificent ascent rises from the very stones that cradle his head, anchoring the divine to the dust of the mortal world, while its summit ascends upward through the layers of the night until it pierces the highest heavens. It is a pathway of brilliant, living light, woven from radiance and shadow, stretching infinitely high into the celestial expanse with a majesty that stills the breath and humbles the soul. The structure is vast, wider than any earthly road, flanked by pillars of shimmering mist and structural beams of pure, uncreated light that pulse with a slow, rhythmic, living energy. Upon this great ascending and descending highway, a ceaseless activity unfolds in the absolute silence of the spirit, a multitude of heavenly messengers moving with purpose and grace. They are figures of light, tall and luminous, clothed in garments that ripple like water touched by starlight, ascending the glowing steps with messages, prayers, and the quiet burdens of the earth, and descending with grace, protection, and the unsearchable will of the Creator. Their movements are effortless, silent, and harmonious, like the gliding of birds upon a thermal wind or the gentle falling of snow upon a still forest, filling the air with a sense of profound order and transcendent peace. There is no sound of footsteps upon the rungs, no rush of wind, only a deep, resonant hum that vibrates through the very fabric of existence, like the chord of a great instrument struck in a cathedral of mountains. Jacob watches, suspended in a state of wonder that transcends fear, feeling his spirit expand to take in the sheer scale of the vision that has been unfolded before his resting place. He realizes that this desolate place, this empty patch of stony ground where he laid his weary head in despair, is not forgotten or forsaken by the divine presence, but is rather a threshold, a hinge upon which heaven and earth turn. At the very summit of the towering stairway, standing amidst the brilliant constellation of descending messengers, a presence manifests that fills the entire field of vision with an overwhelming sense of holiness and warmth. There is no blinding terror in the light, but rather a profound, enveloping authority, an anchor of absolute goodness that stabilizes the spinning universe and focuses directly upon the single sleeping man below. The divine voice, when it speaks, does not thunder through the sky with the sound of crashing rocks or split cedars, but resonates deeply within the core of Jacob's being, speaking with the intimate, resonant tone of an ancient friend. "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac," the voice declares, carrying the weight of centuries, the memory of promises made beneath the oaks of Mamre, and the covenant whispered in the dry valleys of the Negev. The words unfold slowly in the stillness of the vision, settling into the soil of Jacob's heart like gentle rain upon parched earth, bringing with them a strange and unexpected restoration. He feels the coldness of his isolation melting away under the warmth of that presence, replaced by an awareness that he is known, that he is seen, and that even here, in the darkest hour of his exile, he is not alone. The ground upon which you lie, the voice continues, flowing with the steady, unhurried cadence of a river running over smooth stones, I will give to you and to your descendants. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth, spreading out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south, carrying a lineage that cannot be numbered or contained. And in you and in your seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed, a promise of restoration stretching far beyond the borders of this land, touching the very edges of human history with grace. Jacob listens, his heart swelling with a mixture of awe and disbelief, wondering how a fugitive, a man running for his life with only a staff and a stone, could ever become the root of such a vast and enduring tree. He feels the tiny, fragile nature of his mortal existence contrasted against the eternal sweep of the divine decree, yet the promise wraps around him like a sturdy cloak, shielding him from the biting wind of his uncertainties. The voice continues, steady and reassuring, offering a personal assurance that anchors his trembling spirit against the long road that still lies ahead. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you in all places wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. The words linger in the air like the scent of incense after the flame has gone, repeating themselves in the quiet chambers of his mind, offering a shield of invisible protection that will walk with him every step of the way to Paddan Aram. He understands now that his journey is not a random wandering driven by human failure and family strife, but part of a larger, carefully woven tapestry whose threads are held by hands far stronger than his own. The vision begins to recede very slowly, not by vanishing abruptly, but by softening at the edges, the brilliant light of the stairway diffusing into the ordinary grey tones of the pre-dawn atmosphere. The heavenly messengers continue their quiet ascent, fading one by one into the brightening fabric of the morning sky, and the majestic presence at the summit withdraws into the infinite heights from whence it came. The great hum that filled the universe subsides into the ordinary, gentle sounds of the awakening wilderness, the distant cry of a desert bird and the rustle of the dry scrub in the morning breeze. Jacob stirs upon his bed of stones, his muscles stiff from the night chill, yet his spirit is entirely transformed, buoyant with a quiet, steady joy that chases away the remnants of fear and doubt. He opens his eyes to the pale, pearly light of early dawn, the sky overhead shifting from deep indigo to a soft, translucent amber as the sun prepares to crest the distant hills of Moab. The stones beneath his head feel different now, no longer just cold minerals picked at random from the dirt, but markers of a sacred encounter, silent witnesses to the gate of heaven. He lies still for a long moment, letting the silence of the morning wash over him, savoring the lingering residue of the dream that feels more real than the solid ground beneath his feet. Slowly, deliberately, he raises himself up from the earth, brushing the dust from his garments and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air that fills his lungs with new life and unexpected courage. He looks down at the row of stones where his head had rested through the long hours of the night, knowing that he must preserve this spot, that he cannot simply walk away and leave this revelation behind in the dust of anonymity. Reaching down, Jacob picks up the very stone that had served as his uncomfortable pillow, lifting it from the earth with both hands as if it were a vessel of precious gold. He sets it upright, pressing its base firmly into the soil so that it stands like a pillar against the horizon, a visible signpost pointing upward toward the unseen realm. From his traveling pouch, he takes out a small flask of oil, the precious olive oil he had carried for sustenance along the road, and unscrews the lid with careful, reverent fingers. With slow, sweeping motions, he pours the oil over the top of the upright stone, watching as the golden liquid glistens in the early morning light, running down the rough gray facets and soaking into the ancient grain. The oil darkens the stone, giving it a rich, polished luster that catches the first direct rays of the sun as it peeks over the eastern ridge, turning the simple marker into a gleaming monument of devotion. He steps back, watching the oil drip slowly into the earth at the base of the pillar, feeling the profound weight of the covenant sealing itself into the landscape. He names the place Bethel, speaking the word softly into the quiet morning air, knowing that what was once called Luz, a city of almond trees and pagan memories, has now become the house of God and the very gate of heaven. The name carries a new reality, transforming the geography of his exile into a sanctuary, a place he knows he will return to when the wandering years have run their course. He makes a vow there in the quiet dawn, standing alone before the anointed pillar with his hands uplifted to the brightening sky, offering his allegiance to the God who met him in his deepest need. If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my Father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. The words are simple, stripped of pretense or bargaining, the honest prayer of a man who has looked into eternity and found his footing upon the solid rock of promise. And this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me I will surely give a tenth to you. The sun climbs higher into the clear blue sky, casting long, sharp shadows across the plateau of Bethel and warming the stones where the traveler had spent his night of transformation. Jacob gathers his traveling cloak, adjusts his pack upon his shoulders, and takes up his wooden staff, feeling a renewed strength in his stride as he turns his face once more toward the northern road. He casts one final look back at the gleaming pillar of stone standing tall against the horizon, its anointed surface catching the morning light like a silent sentinel guarding the threshold of the invisible world. The path ahead remains long, winding through unfamiliar valleys and across dry riverbeds toward the distant pastures of Haran where Laban tends his flocks, and many days of toil and testing still await him in the years to come. Yet the loneliness that had weighed upon him when the sun went down has vanished completely, replaced by the steady, unshakable assurance that he walks accompanied by an unseen presence that never slumbers nor sleeps. He takes his first steps forward, his boots crunching softly upon the dry gravel, moving with the quiet confidence of a man whose feet are set upon a road watched over by the heavens. The path ahead of him wound downward through the undulating hills of the central ridge, a rocky spine of ancient limestone that stretched across the land like the backbone of the earth. The air was cool now, rinsed clean by the passage of the night, carrying the sharp, medicinal scent of wild sage and crushed thyme bruised beneath the quiet tread of his sandals. Every stone along the track bore the grey-white dust of the desert margins, glowing faintly in the first pearlescent wash of dawn that began to bleed over the eastern horizon. The shadows cast by the dwarf oaks and terebinth trees stretched long and thin across the sloping meadows, pointing westward like fingers of ink slowly withdrawing from the light. Jacob walked in a silence that felt heavy and profound, not of emptiness, but of a presence so dense it filled the spaces between his breaths. His mind, usually sharp and calculating with the weight of bargains, livestock tallies, and the sharp rivalry of tents left behind, felt remarkably still, like the surface of a deep cistern undisturbed by wind. He could feel the coarse wool of his tunic brushing against his skin, the rhythmic swing of his arms, the slight ache in his shoulder where the leather strap of his traveling pouch rested. These ordinary sensations grounded him, yet they were permeated by a strange, luminous quality, as if the dream at Luz had somehow seeped out of the night and dyed the waking world in softer, more enduring colors. By mid-morning, the trail dipped into a wide basin where the earth softened into patches of reddish-brown loam, cultivated in small, walled terraces by shepherds who had pastured these hills for generations. Here and there, ancient olive trees twisted their gnarled trunks toward the sky, their silver-green leaves shimmering like schools of tiny fish turning in unison beneath the surface of clear water. The bark of the trees was deeply furrowed, dark and cool to the touch, offering a quiet refuge of shade where sheep huddled together in woolly clusters, resting through the heat that was slowly beginning to build against the rocks. A shepherd boy sat upon a low stone wall nearby, whittling a small piece of soft sycamore wood with a curved bronze blade, the soft scraping sound mingling with the gentle, rhythmic tinkling of bronze bells hung from the necks of the lead ewes. He looked up as Jacob passed, his eyes dark and wide with the watchful innocence of those who spend their lives gazing into the vast, empty distances of the sky. Jacob raised a hand in a slow, wordless greeting, a gesture passed between travelers since the world was young, and the boy nodded back, his lips parting in a faint, fleeting smile. There was no need for speech. The road belonged to both of them, winding through an ancient landscape that asked nothing of travelers save that they keep moving toward whatever horizon awaited them. The history of these hills was written in the very stones beneath his feet, fragments of flint and fossilized shell left behind by an ancient sea that had retreated long before human memory began. This was the land of the patriarchs, the soil where Abraham had pitched his black goat hair tents beneath the oaks of Mamre, and where Isaac had walked out into the fields at eventide to meditate in the quiet hush of the gloaming. To walk here was to walk through a living tapestry of memory, where every well dug into the chalky bedrock and every cairn piled high to mark a boundary spoke of promises whispered in the dark to men who had nothing to lean upon save an invisible word. As the sun climbed higher, casting a brassy glare across the white limestone paths, Jacob felt the familiar stir of physical weariness, yet it was a clean, honest fatigue that reached no deeper than his muscles. He reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a hard crust of barley bread and a small handful of dried figs, their sweetness rich and dense against the dry roof of his mouth. He ate slowly, chewing each morsel with deliberate care, tasting the sun-baked grain and the sticky fruit, letting the simple act of eating anchor him firmly in the physical reality of the day. A hawk circled lazily far above, a solitary speck against the blinding blue of the noon sky, riding invisible thermal currents with effortless grace, drifting toward the distant blue haze of the Jordan Valley. The afternoon wore on in a long, unbroken stretch of amber light that seemed to thicken as the sun began its slow descent toward the western sea. The hills cast their shadows once more, reversing the morning's pattern, stretching eastward across the valleys in long, cooling swathes of slate gray and purple. Flocks began their slow, dusty migration back toward the stone folds near the encampments, driven by the low shouts of drovers and the frantic barking of sharp-eared dogs that kept the stragglers from wandering into the thorny brush. The air grew cooler by degrees, the fierce glare softening into a gentle, golden luminescence that touched the tips of the grass and the edges of the outcropping rocks with a warm, buttery glow. Jacob crested a low ridge and paused, wiping a forearm across his damp forehead, looking out over a wide, sweeping valley where a cluster of low stone dwellings and dark-skinned tents clung to the slope like limpets on a sea rock. Smoke curled lazily from the center of the camp, thin and blue against the darkening hills, smelling of burning camel dung and roasting scrub oak, the universal scent of evening hearths and homecoming. This was Haran's direction, though still many days of hard travel away, across blistering deserts and lawless frontiers where bands of nomadic raiders roamed the dry wadis in search of stray livestock and vulnerable merchants. Yet the knot of anxiety that had tightened his stomach when he first fled the tents of Beersheba was gone, replaced by a steady, rhythmic cadence in his blood. He stepped down the slope, his pace unhurried, his eyes taking in the rich details of the gathering dusk, the wheeling flight of pigeons returning to their roosts in the cliff face, the rich, coppery scent of churned dust settling in the tracks, the first pale pinpricks of starlight beginning to puncture the deep velvet of the eastern sky. He found a level spot beneath the boughs of a spreading terebinth tree just outside the perimeter of the camp, where the ground was soft with a deep carpet of fallen leaves and dry needles. Dropping his traveling staff to the earth with a dull, wooden thud, he unslung his leather pouch and let it fall beside him, sinking down onto the cool, mossy roots of the tree. He leaned his head back against the rough, fissured bark, closing his eyes as the day's warmth radiated gently upward from the stones around him. The sounds of the camp drifted over on the faint evening breeze, a woman singing a low, repetitive lullaby to a restless child, the metallic clatter of a bronze cooking pot, the deep, rumbling cough of a camel settling down for the night. These sounds wove themselves into the fabric of his thoughts, forming a soft, protective barrier against the vastness of the dark that was now closing in from every side. He remembered the top of the ladder, the blinding, unearthly radiance that had pierced the veil of sleep, and the voice that had promised an unending lineage, a land stretching out beyond the reach of his own eyes, and a presence that would never abandon him, no matter how far he wandered into the strange and unfamiliar lands of the East. It was not a demand for perfection, nor a set of heavy laws carved into cold stone. It was simply a pledge, an anchor thrown out into the storm of human uncertainty, holding fast against every wind that blew. He breathed in deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp night air, and let it out in a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry away the last remnants of his old, fearful self. The stars above him burned with a steady, diamond-like brilliance, unblinking eyes looking down upon the small, solitary figure resting beneath the tree, watching over him as the silence deepened and the world turned once more toward the quiet promise of the coming dawn, while the wind whispered softly through the ancient leaves above his head, carrying the endless, unchanging story of a God who meets the weary traveler right where he falls asleep, weaving golden threads between the dust of the earth and the endless expanse of the heavens above, holding every heart in the palm of an unyielding and tender grace that stretches far beyond the boundaries of human sight, deeper than the deepest wells of human sorrow, anchoring the wandering soul in a harbor of quiet, unending peace that remains long after the last embers of the day have turned to gray and the night has gathered every wandering sheep into the fold of its vast and silent dark, where Jacob lay breathing softly, held safely in the hollow of a love that neither slumbers nor sleeps, but watches over the quiet pathways of the world with an unblinking, eternal gaze that turns every stone of sorrow into a pillow of rest, stretching onward through the silent hours toward the unwritten chapters of a journey only just beginning to unfold beneath the watchful canopy of the stars. The night air cools rapidly against the limestone plateau of Luz, the radiant heat of the sun-baked earth slowly releasing into the vast expanse of the Judean wilderness, where the silence is absolute save for the occasional soft rustle of a desert wind sliding across the sparse scrub and dry grasses. Jacob leaves upon his chosen pillow of stone, his limbs heavy with the profound fatigue of a man who has walked many leagues in a single day, fleeing the sharp words of his brother and the heavy grief of his mother, carrying only a staff in his hand and the quiet ache of uncertainty in his chest. His breathing deepens, falling into the slow, steady rhythm of the deep country at midnight, when the world seems to contract to the single circle of warmth cast by his own body against the cold ground. Around him, the ancient hills, later to be known as Bethel, the house of God, roll away into the purple gloom, shaped by millennia of wind and rain into terraced slopes of grey rock and shadowed earth, where travelers have paused for generations to seek refuge beneath the indifferent, brilliant dome of the night sky. In this high place, far from the familiar walled courtyards of Beersheba and the gentle murmur of his mother's voice inside the goat-hair tents, the boundary between the ordinary world and the unseen dimensions of the cosmos grows wonderfully thin, softened by the absolute quiet and the profound isolation of the wilderness. Jacob's mind, untethered from the immediate demands of survival and the anxious calculations of his flight, drifts backward and forward all at once, reliving the parting gesture of Isaac, his aging father, whose hands, diminished by age and clouded by failing sight, rested upon his head with the steady, dry warmth of ancient olive wood. He remembers the smell of roasted barley and wood smoke that lingered in the family compound, the heavy weight of the wool garments he wears, and the distinct, dry snap of twigs beneath his sandals as he turned his back on everything he had ever known to step out into the unknown road stretching toward the distant horizons of Paddan Aram. And then, as the night deepens and the constellation of the Pleiades wheels slowly overhead, marking the passage of the middle watches, the darkness above him begins to change, not with the sudden blaze of dawn, but with a shimmering, pearl-grey luminescence that seems to dissolve the very fabric of the night sky. A stairway appears, or rather a vast architectural ascending structure carved from leaving light and shadow, resting its broad base firmly upon the rough, dew-damp stones where his head is laid, while its luminous summit pierces the highest vaults of the heavens, vanishing into a blindingly bright horizon where the ordinary laws of distance and gravity no longer hold any sway. It is a structure of immense breadth and staggering height, resembling the stepped ziggurats of the Mesopotamian plains that Jacob has only ever heard whispered about in travelers' tales, those towering brick mountains built by human hands to reach the dwelling place of the gods. Yet this is no fragile monument of mud and straw, but a highway forged of pure radiance, trembling with a quiet, leaving energy that hums like the deep resonance of a distant harp string. Upon this great ascending and descending way, the messengers of the divine move with an unhurried, purposeful grace, their forms shifting between the likeness of men and pillars of leaving fire, robed in garments that catch the shifting hues of sapphire, amber, and smoke. Some descend from the blinding brilliance of the upper realms, treading the luminous steps with feet that make no sound against the light, their faces turned toward the sleeping earth with expressions of profound attention and care, bearing silent mandates and unseen ministrations to every corner of the waiting world. Others ascend from the dark valleys and stony wilderness below, carrying the burdens of mortal sighs, prayers, and quiet tears upward into the celestial courts, moving with an effortless upward glide that defies the heavy pull of the ground from which they sprang. Jacob watches them from his place upon the earth, feeling no terror in his chest, only a vast, expanding wonder that fills his lungs with the cool, sweet scent of mountain air and cedar resin, as if his soul has suddenly widened to accommodate the sheer scale of the universe. At the very top of this towering ladder, where the light dissolves into a source so pure that it cannot be looked upon directly without the eyes weeping, stands the Presence, majestic and unfathomable, yet speaking with a voice that resonates not merely through the physical ears, but within the deepest chambers of the listener's marrow. The voice is like the sound of many waters rushing over ancient river stones, or the low, vibrating thunder of a summer storm rolling across the distant hills of Gilead, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority and tender, personal affection. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac, the divine voice declares, the words wrapping around Jacob like a warm mantle spun from gold and silence, anchoring his drifting spirit in the bedrock of an ancient, unbroken promise. The land on which you lie, this hard, unpromising bed of limestone and thistles beneath your tired head, I will give to you and to your descendants, stretching your line out across the dust of the earth until they are as numerous as the grains of sand caught between the dry roots of the desert shrubs. The promise swells and deepens, echoing down the long corridors of time that have not yet been written, whispering of a future where his name will become a blessing upon the lips of families yet unborn, and where every direction of the compass, north and south, east and west, will feel the quiet, permeating influence of the seed that springs from his loins. And behold, I am with you, the voice continues, sinking like gentle rain into the parched earth of Jacob's exiled heart, promising protection along every twist and turn of the winding road that lies ahead, guarding his footsteps through foreign lands and bringing him back again in peace to this very soil. For I will not leave you, nor abandon the work of my hands until I have accomplished every word that I have spoken to you this night, sealing the covenant with a stillness so profound that even the stars above seem to hold their breath in reverence. The vision holds him suspended in that timeless space where past and future merge into a single, eternal present, allowing him to taste the absolute security of a universe governed not by blind chance or the ruthless calculus of human cunning, but by a deliberate, loving intention that reaches down from the highest heavens to touch the cheek of a lonely fugitive sleeping on a stone. He feels the coolness of the night dew settling upon his wool cloak, yet his skin feels warm, infused with an inner glow that defies the chill of the Judean plateau, his mind registering every minute detail of the sensory landscape with an intensified clarity, the sharp tang of wild thyme crushed beneath his shoulder, the distant, mournful cry of a jackal echoing across the dry wadi below, and the steady, rhythmic pulsing of his own blood keeping time with the eternal heartbeat of the cosmos. He is no longer merely Jacob, the younger twin who slipped through the doorway of his father's tent with deceit in his hands and fear at his heels. He is a witness to the threshold of eternity, a keeper of the gate through which heaven leans down to kiss the dust of the earth. Gradually, as the first faint grey wash of dawn begins to dilute the deep indigo of the eastern sky, bleeding into the jagged silhouettes of the hills like watercolor spilled upon damp parchment, the brilliant ladder begins to dissolve, its luminous steps fading back into the clear, empty air of morning with the gentle slowness of mist burning off an alpine lake. The silence that follows is not an empty absence, but a rich, resonant quiet that seems to hold the memory of celestial music, lingering in the branches of the dwarf oaks and among the crevices of the grey limestone rocks. Jacob stirs slowly from his deep slumber, his eyelids fluttering against the returning light of common day, yet his body feels surprisingly light, restored by a quality of rest that transcends mere physical sleep, leaving his muscles relaxed and his spirit anchored in an unshakable calm. He does not spring up with the frantic energy of a man startled from a nightmare. Rather, he opens his eyes with the slow, deliberate wonder of one who wakes to find that the dream is truer than the waking world he left behind the night before. He lies still for a long moment, staring up at the pale morning sky where the last stars are winking out one by one, feeling the hard curve of the stone beneath his neck and the damp chill of the morning breeze rustling the fringes of his tunic. "Surely the Lord is in this place," he whispers into the quiet air, his voice sounding thin and small against the vastness of the plateau, yet carrying a weight of conviction that transforms the empty wilderness into a royal court. "I did not know it," he adds, shaking his head with a quiet, self-effacing wonder as he remembers how casually he had chosen this rough patch of ground for his bed, mistaking a sanctuary for a mere resting place in the dust. A sudden, trembling awe washes over him, making his skin prickle and his breath catch in his throat as he realizes the sheer holiness of the ground upon which his ordinary feet have trodden, turning the landscape from a barren stage of exile into the very threshold of the divine presence. "How dreadful is this place," he murmurs, using the ancient Hebrew idiom not for terror, but for that paralyzing, beautiful reverence that seizes a mortal when confronted with the unfiltered majesty of the Creator. "This is none other than the house of God, and this is the very gate of heaven, the portal through which the unseen realities of the universe cross over into the tangible substance of wood and stone, earth and blood." Rising early in the cool grey light of dawn, before the sun has crested the distant mountains of Moab to cast its long, searching shadows across the valleys, Jacob takes the stone that he had put under his head for a pillow, lifting it from the damp earth with both hands as if it were a vessel of beaten gold. He sets it up upright as a pillar, a standing witness to the transaction that has passed between earth and heaven during the dark watches of the night, driving its base firmly into the soil so that it stands straight and tall against the slope of the hill. With the careful, reverent movements of a priest performing an ancient rite, he reaches into his traveling pack and retrieves a small flask of oil, the precious olive oil he had carried with him from the well-watered groves of Beersheba to sustain him on his long journey to Haran. He uncorks the clay vessel, the rich, earthy scent of pressed olives mixing with the crisp morning air, and pours the golden liquid slowly over the top of the upright stone, watching as it glistens in the early light, running down the grey carved flanks of the limestone in shimmering rivulets before soaking deep into the porous rock. The act is simple, yet freighted with profound significance, setting the stone apart from all other stones in the wilderness, consecrating it as a sacred boundary marker where the common earth has been wedded to the divine promise through the medium of oil and prayer. He names the place Bethel, speaking the syllables aloud as if sealing a legal document in the presence of unseen witnesses, though the city had previously borne the older Canaanite name of Luz, a reminder of the almond trees that once grew thickly in its rocky ravines. Yet the old name falls away, swallowed up by the new reality that has been stamped upon the landscape, transforming a geographic coordinate into a spiritual landmark that will endure through the centuries in the collective memory of his descendants. Then Jacob makes a vow, standing before the anointed pillar with his hands raised, palms upward toward the brightening sky, sealing his commitment not with pride or self-reliance, but with the cautious, measured humility of a traveler who knows his own weakness and the long, difficult road that still stretches out before his feet. "If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God." The terms of the vow are remarkably spare, stripped of all grandiosity, asking only for the fundamental necessities of human pilgrimage, safe passage, daily bread, simple garments, and the eventual return to the familiar hearth of his youth, while offering in return the lifelong allegiance of his house and heart. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house, he declares, his voice steady and clear in the morning air, and of all that you give me I will surely give 1/10 to you, binding his future prosperity to the source from which all blessings flow, establishing a rhythm of gratitude that will mark the generations springing from his blood. The sun finally breaks over the horizon, a brilliant disk of molten copper that floods the plateau with sudden, horizontal light, turning the dew-soaked grass into a glittering carpet of diamonds and casting long, sharp shadows behind the standing stone that points like a finger toward the western sky. With the covenant sealed and the pillar standing firm in its place of honor, Jacob gathers his meager belongings, slinging his traveling bag over his shoulder and grasping his wooden staff with a renewed sense of purpose that lightens his step and lifts his chin. He turns his face toward the northeast, toward the distant, rolling plains of Paddan Aram where Laban his mother's brother dwells, stepping out from the sacred precinct of Bethel with a spring in his stride that was entirely absent the evening before when he dragged his weary body across the stony soil. The road ahead is still long, stretching across hundreds of miles of parched desert tracks, foreign territories, and uncertain encounters with men whose motives he cannot yet fathom, yet the heavy cloud of loneliness that hung over his departure from Beersheba has been utterly burned away by the radiant memory of the ladder and the unshakable promise whispered in the dark. He walks for hours as the morning climbs into the sky, the air growing warmer and the dust rising in soft, golden clouds around his sandals, passing small clumps of terebinth trees and terraced fields where early shepherds are already moving their flocks toward the seasonal springs. His mind turns over the details of the vision, replaying the movement of the messengers upon the steps of light, savoring the exact cadence of the divine voice, letting the profound reassurance of those moments sink deeper into his emotional landscape with every mile he puts between himself and the place of his revelation. He feels himself to be part of something infinitely larger than his own immediate trials, a grand, unfolding tapestry whose threads reach backward to Abraham beneath the oaks of Mamre and forward into a future he cannot see, yet knows to be secure because the hand that drew the ladder upon the night sky holds the destiny of the world. The landscape begins to change as he descends from the central mountain ridge toward the broader valleys of the north, the steep, rocky limestone giving way to rolling hills dotted with pistachio trees and wild almond groves, where the hum of insects and the distant bleating of sheep provide a comforting background melody to his solitary march. By midday, he pauses beside a deep well carved into the white rock, where a group of local herdsmen are watering their cattle from stone troughs, resting his aching back against the cool surface of the well curb while he shares a handful of dried dates and parched corn from his leather pouch. The men eye him with the quiet, guarded curiosity common to pastoral folk meeting strangers on the highway, noting the dust upon his garments and the solitary staff in his hand, yet Jacob greets them with a civil tongue and a peaceful countenance that disarms any latent suspicion, joining them in easy, desultory conversation about the state of the pastures and the recent rains. There is a lightness in his demeanor now, an inner composure that communicates itself without words, making him look less like a hunted fugitive fleeing the wrath of an offended brother and more like a man walking with an invisible companion whose presence makes every hardship bearable and every danger seem small. He listens to their tales of the road ahead, the dryness of the tracks through the hill country of Ephraim, the steep descent toward the valley of the Jordan, and the long, monotonous stretches of gravel plain that lead onward toward the Syrian desert, without feeling the cold grip of anxiety that usually accompanies the unknown. His feet are tired, and the soles of his sandals are already beginning to show the wear of the harsh stones, but his spirit remains buoyant, sustained by the secret knowledge that the God of his fathers has staked a claim upon his life in the middle of nowhere, turning a nameless night in the wilderness into the very gate of heaven. He resumes his journey as the sun begins its long, slanting descent toward the western sea, casting amber light across the undulating hills and turning the distant dust plumes of passing caravans into pillars of pale gold against the darkening blue of the afternoon sky. The rhythm of his walking becomes a form of meditation, each step matching the silent cadence of the promise echoing within his mind, "I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go," translating the grand theological vision of the night into the simple, practical currency of daily endurance, one foot placed deliberately in front of the other across the vast and ancient land of Canaan. He crosses streams that run low in their gravel beds, climbs ridges that offer sweeping panoramas of green valleys and distant stone villages, and watches the shadows lengthen across the terraced hillsides as the afternoon wanes toward evening, slipping effortlessly into the timeless routine of the ancient wanderer. By the time the sun dips below the horizon in a blaze of violet and crimson fire, painting the high clouds with streaks of brilliant orange and rose, Jacob finds himself approaching another clump of trees near a well-traveled junction of the road, where other travelers are beginning to make camp for the night. He chooses a quiet spot beneath the spreading branches of a large terebinth tree, spreading his woolen cloak upon the soft grass rather than the bare stones of the previous night, though his thoughts remain irresistibly drawn backward to the pillar of Bethel standing in solitary dignity miles behind him in the dark. He gathers a small armful of dry twigs to build a modest cooking fire, striking flint against steel until a bright spark catches the tinder, and watches the cheerful orange flames leap up against the gathering gloom, casting dancing shadows upon the rough bark of the tree above his head. The smell of wood smoke and the quiet crackle of burning branches provide a familiar, grounding comfort as he sits cross-legged on the earth, eating a simple meal of bread dipped in water and reflecting upon the astonishing distance he has traveled both physically and spiritually since the dawn of yesterday. He knows that months, perhaps even years, of exile lie ahead of him in the distant service of Laban, an uncle whose reputation for cleverness and sharp dealing is well known among the herdsmen of the southern routes, yet the thought brings no bitterness to his heart, only a quiet resolve to face whatever tests of character and endurance await him in the foreign household. He looks up at the emerging stars, recognizing familiar constellations wheeling across the night sky, and feels a profound sense of continuity linking the vast, indifferent universe above with the small, breathing life of the man sitting quietly by the fire below. The world settles into its nocturnal stillness, the distant murmurs of the neighboring camp fading one by one into the low, steady drone of crickets and the soft whispering of the night wind through the leaves of the terebinth tree, wrapping the weary traveler in a cocoon of solitude that feels no longer lonely, but deeply accompanied. Jacob wraps his cloak tightly around his shoulders, stretches out his limbs upon the soft grass, and closes his eyes, letting the gentle tide of sleep wash over his consciousness as his thoughts drift once more toward that luminous stairway stretching from earth to heaven, where the messengers of God continually ascend and descend through the quiet watches of the unceasing night. The night air of the central hill country grows steadily cooler, a heavy dew beginning to settle upon the dry limestone plateaus and the low-lying scrub of the wilderness of Luz. All around the resting traveler, the ancient landscape lies wrapped in profound stillness, untouched by the passage of empires or the clamor of distant cities. The great stone that serves as a pillow retains a lingering warmth from the afternoon sun, a comforting anchor against the chill that creeps up from the rocky valleys below. High above, the canopy of stars wheels slowly across the vast expanse of the Judean sky, burning with a clear, steady brilliance unique to the high altitudes of the central ridge. There is no sound save for the occasional rustle of a night wind brushing against the stiff leaves of a solitary terebinth tree, or the faint, distant call of a jackal echoing across the stony wadis. In this high and isolated place, far from the familiar tents of Beersheba and the protective presence of Isaac and Rebekah, time seems to lose its rigid edges, stretching out into an endless, quiet expanse of darkness and deep, restorative rest. Hours pass in this unbroken sanctuary of sleep, measured only by the slow rotation of the constellations and the gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of Jacob's breathing. Yet even as the physical body surrenders completely to the restorative currents of slumber, the inner landscape of the mind remains attuned to the lingering resonance of the divine encounter. The vision of the great staircase does not simply vanish with the fading of the initial light, rather, it weaves itself deep into the subconscious fabric of the night, existing just behind the closed eyelids in a state of quiet, luminous suspension. The ancient stones of the Bethel plateau, ordinary and rugged in the harsh glare of noon, take on a strange and enduring dignity, transformed by the memory of holiness into something akin to the threshold of a sanctuary. It is a place where the veil between the seen and the unseen, the temporal and the eternal, hangs thinner than gossamer, stirred only by the silent passage of heavenly messengers moving quietly between the realms of earth and sky. The geography of this place speaks of ancient pathways and immemorial journeys, a natural crossroads known to generations of herdsmen and travelers who trod the rugged spine of the land long before the patriarchs raised their altars here. The Central Ridge route, later known as the Way of the Patriarchs, winds its way through these very hills, connecting the high pastures of the south with the fertile valleys of the north. Those who walked this path relied entirely upon the landmarks etched into the topography, a distinct outcropping of rock, a grove of ancient trees, a high ridge commanding a view of the distant Jordan Rift Valley. To camp in such a place was to acknowledge one's utter dependence upon the mercy of the elements and the protection of the unseen Creator. Jacob, fleeing the righteous anger of his twin brother Esau with only a staff in his hand, had stepped out from the relative security of family life into the raw, unpredictable expanse of the open road, carrying with him the heavy burden of deception, a troubled conscience, and the quiet, gnawing ache of uncertainty regarding what tomorrow might bring. Yet in the heart of the night, beneath the open dome of the heavens, that burden has been met by an overwhelming manifestation of grace that asks for nothing and offers everything. The promise given to Abraham upon the plains of Moreh and renewed to Isaac in the time of famine has now descended upon the fleeing grandson, not within the walls of a city or the sanctity of a tented shrine, but upon the hard, cold stones of the open wilderness. The divine voice, echoing with a warmth that defies the chill of the midnight air, spoke of land and descendants, of a multitude spreading out to the four corners of the earth, and of an unbreakable tether of protection that would accompany the traveler wherever his footsteps might wander. It is a covenant written not on tablets of stone, but upon the very landscape through which he moves, assuring him that even here, in this desolate and unfamiliar region far from home, he is neither forgotten nor forsaken by the God of his fathers. The silence of the pre-dawn hours settles over the camp with a palpable density, a cool, velvety stillness that precedes the first pale wash of dawn across the eastern horizon. The stars begin to pale slightly, their sharp points softening into a milky haze as the deepest part of the night gives way to the quiet approach of morning. Jacob stirs only slightly, shifting his position against the stone pillar, his mind still wrapped in the lingering peace of the dream. The memory of the ascending and descending messengers remains vivid, a silent testimony to the unceasing vigilance of heaven over the affairs of earth. In the quiet theater of sleep, the soul processes these profound mysteries, absorbing the quiet assurance that human solitude is merely an illusion, that behind the visible curtain of the world lies an active, bustling realm of divine care and purposeful intent, moving in harmony with the unfolding promises of the Almighty. Gradually, the charcoal gray of the eastern sky begins to purple, hinting at the slow, inevitable return of the sun over the Moabite mountains far across the Jordan Valley. The first tentative breath of morning wind stirs the dry grass, carrying the crisp, clean scent of dew-kissed limestone and wild thyme. It is the hour when the nocturnal world yields its dominion to the waking day, when shadows lengthen in the opposite direction and the sharp contours of the rocky hills emerge once more from the softening embrace of the dark. Jacob opens his eyes slowly, greeting the pale light not with the startled confusion of one who has merely had a passing fancy, but with the quiet, settled clarity of one who has looked upon the face of eternity and carried its imprint back across the threshold of waking consciousness. The air of the early morning at Luz carries the cool, damp weight of the Judean hills before the sun has burned away the night moisture from the stones. Jacob remained still for a long moment, stretched out upon the hard limestone shelf that served as his pillow through the hours of darkness, letting the rough texture of the rock remind him of the solid earth beneath his back. The dream has faded like mist caught in the first rays of dawn, yet the residue of its vastness clings to the ordinary quiet of the landscape, tinting the grey scrub oak and the pale dust of the path with an unearthly significance. He does not move hastily, for his limbs feel heavy with a profound and restorative tiredness, as though his body participated in the journey up and down the burning terraces of light even while his spirit wandered among the ministering messengers of the Almighty. The silence of the morning is absolute, broken only by the distant, mournful call of a dove hidden deep within the foliage of a terebinth tree down the slope, and the soft, rhythmic shifting of the hooves of his tethered animal somewhere in the shadows. Slowly, with the deliberate care of a man handling something infinitely fragile and sacred, Jacob slides his hand out from beneath his head and touches the stone that supported him through the night. The surface is cold to the touch, beaded with the heavy dew of the highlands, yet it feels different now from the indifferent boulders that are scattered haphazardly across the barren ridges of the central watershed. In the ancient world of Canaan, such natural pillars of unhewn rock were frequently viewed by the local inhabitants, the Canaanite villagers of nearby Luz, as numinous markers, places where the veil between the earthly realm and the divine dwelling was thought to be remarkably thin. Long before the patriarchs wandered these dry hills, pastoral nomads and settled agrarians alike recognized these geological anomalies as standing stones, or beetles, believed to be inhabited by the very essence of a deity. But what Jacob encountered here was no localized spirit of the grove or territorial god bound to the contours of a specific hill. It was the living presence of the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, revealing himself not through carved idols of wood or stone, but through an open gateway of heaven itself. With a slow, unhurried motion, Jacob rises to his feet, wincing slightly as the stiffness in his joints protests the hard bed of the wilderness, and he stands upright to face the newly awakening world. The eastern horizon is beginning to glow with a soft, diffused amber light that bleeds through the layers of grey clouds, turning the jagged limestone crests into dark silhouettes against a pale, washed canvas of lavender and gold. He picks up the heavy stone that served as his resting place, a dense block of hard, Cenomanian limestone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, and lifts it from the soil. With deliberate, reverent strength, he carries the pillar a few paces higher up the slope, where a natural shelf of bedrock offers a stable foundation, and he sets it upright, planting its base firmly in the earth so that it stands tall against the vast expanse of the morning sky. The act of setting up a standing stone is an ancient covenantal custom among the Semitic peoples of the ancient Near East, a tangible witness to an intangible promise, a permanent stake driven into the temporal soil to mark the intersection of human history with the eternal. Yet Jacob does more than merely erect a pillar. As the first golden rays of the sun finally clear the distant mountains of Moab across the Jordan Valley and strike the top of the upright stone, he reaches into his traveling pack and retrieves a small skin flask of precious oil, olive oil pressed from the fruitful groves of Hebron, carried southward to sustain him through the long and perilous journey toward Haran. With a steady, gentle hand, he uncorks the flask and pours the golden liquid slowly over the top of the rock. The oil catches the morning light, gleaming brightly before it begins to trace its way down the weathered grooves and ancient fissures of the stone, darkening the pale grey limestone to a rich, glistening amber. The rich, earthy fragrance of crushed olives mingles with the sharp, clean scent of dew-kissed wormhole and wild thyme, rising into the cool morning air as an offering of simple, unpretentious devotion. The silence around him deepens as the oil spreads across the stone, and Jacob stands motionless, watching the liquid sink into the porous rock. He names the place Bethel, whispering the word softly to the empty hills, knowing that the ancient name of the nearby city, Luz, named for the almond trees that cling to the rocky ravines, must now be set aside in favor of the name that reflects the true identity of this desolate slope. House of God. The phrase carries no grand architectural pretense. There are no towering cedar beams here, no gilded walls of beaten bronze, no woven tapestries of blue and purple and scarlet such as will one day furnish the sanctuary of the wilderness or the temple upon Mount Zion. There is only a single upright stone, wet with oil, standing under the immense, indifferent dome of the morning sky. Yet in the quiet estimation of the patriarch, this barren hill possesses a reality far more enduring than any man-made shrine, for it is founded not upon human ambition or royal decree, but upon the unbidden, grace-filled initiative of the Creator who stoops to meet a solitary fugitive upon a lonely road. He remembers the town of Luz, leaving quietly in the valley just out of sight, its mud-brick walls and thatched roofs nestled among the terraced orchards of figs and almonds. When he passed near its outskirts the evening before, weary and anxious, the town had seemed like a symbol of all that was closed to him, a place of settled homes, secure families, and communal warmth where he, the deceiving brother and the fleeing exile, had no rightful place at the hearth. The inhabitants of Luz worshipped their own local deities with rites passed down through generations, invoking powers that demanded appeasement and fear. But the God who met Jacob upon this barren ridge demanded no sacrifice of blood upon that night of terror and wonder. He offered only a promise, an unshakable anchor thrown forward into the turbulent waters of an uncertain future. Jacob looks down toward the hidden town with a new serenity in his gaze, no longer feeling the stinging shame of his deception or the bitter chill of rejection, for he carries within his breast a certainty that supersedes the judgment of men and the boundaries of nations. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows retreat into the hollows of the limestone rocks, revealing the true harshness of the landscape that surrounds him. This is the central ridge route of Canaan, the ancient watershed highway that will later be known as the Patriarch's Way, a rocky spine of the country where travel is always arduous and water is scarce. Every mile of this path requires persistence, and every night brings the vulnerability of the open wilderness. Yet as Jacob looks out over the undulating hills rolling away toward the western sea and the deep drop of the Jordan Rift to the east, the terrain no longer appears hostile or empty. It is peopled by the memory of the ascending and descending messengers, a reminder that the seemingly blank spaces of the earth are in truth bustling thresholds of divine activity, where the invisible government of the universe touches the mundane dust upon which men tread. He sits down once more near the base of the anointed pillar, resting his back against a low outcrop of rock as he prepares to formalize the encounter in the traditional manner of his people, framing his experience with a vow that acknowledges both his profound gratitude and his human dependence. The sunlight now bathes the entire slope in a warm, white brilliance, driving away the last remnants of the nocturnal chill and drawing a thin, shimmering haze from the valleys below. His mind drifts back across the days of his upbringing in the well-watered pastures of Beersheba, where his mother Rebekah's watchful eye and his father Isaac's gentle, failing presence provided a protective enclosure against the wider, more dangerous world. He recalls the quiet conversations by the tent doors at twilight, the familiar smell of wood smoke and roasting grain, and the reassuring presence of the flocks returning to their folds as the evening star appeared in the west. All of that is now far behind him, separated by days of solitary walking and the irrevocable breach with his twin brother Esau, whose fierce anger still echoes faintly in the memory of the household he was forced to abandon. In the quiet of the morning, Jacob speaks aloud to the empty air, framing his thoughts into a vow that rises like incense from the stone. His voice is low and measured, carrying no tone of bargaining or desperate manipulation, but rather the steady, reflective cadence of a man making a solemn covenant with the one who has just claimed him. If God will indeed be with me, he murmurs to the listening hills, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. The conditions he names are remarkably modest for one who is heir to the immense covenant promises given to Abraham and Isaac. He does not ask for vast wealth, nor conquering armies, nor dominion over nations, but simply the fundamental necessities of human survival, safe passage, daily bread, simple garments, and the ultimate blessing of a safe return to the home of his youth. It is the prayer of a man stripped of all false self-reliance, recognizing that every breath he draws and every step he takes depends utterly upon the gracious sustenance of the divine hand. He looks again at the standing stone, now gleaming softly in the strong daylight where the oil has partially penetrated its grey pores. And this stone, he continues, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me I will surely give 1/10 to you. The promise of the tithe is an ancient acknowledgement of divine sovereignty, a recognition that everything possessed by man is held merely as a stewardship from the ultimate proprietor of heaven and earth. By committing to return a tenth of all his future gains, Jacob binds his economic life, his future flocks, and his burgeoning household to the sanctuary he has just established upon this remote hill. It is an act of trust cast far into the future, anticipating a time when he will indeed possess wealth and substance, yet remembering always the humble rock upon which he slept with only a stone for a pillow and the night sky as his roof. The morning breeze begins to freshen, sweeping across the high ridge from the Mediterranean coast to the west, carrying the distant, salt-tinged freshness of the sea over the intervening hills of the Shephelah. The leaves of the terebinth trees rustle with a dry, papery sound, and the small lizards that inhabit the crevices of the limestone dart swiftly between the rocks, startled by the movement of the traveler. Jacob gathers his few belongings, checking the thongs of his sandals and tightening the straps of his leather pouch, ensuring that everything is in readiness for the resumption of his journey. Yet he does not rush. The feverish anxiety that drove him out of Beersheba under the cover of secrecy has been replaced by a deep, unhurried composure. He knows now that he is not a stray wanderer drifting aimlessly across the map of the ancient world at the mercy of capricious fates or human vengeance. He is a man under guard, accompanied down every lonely mile by the unseen legions of heaven. He turns away from the pillar for a brief moment to check his beasts, finding them calm and rested, their strong backs ready to bear the burdens of the road once more. The donkeys lift their heads as he approaches, their long ears swiveling to catch the familiar sound of his voice, and he strokes their muzzles gently, speaking words of quiet encouragement. The animal world around him seems part of the same ordered creation that he witnessed in his vision, where every creature has its place and its appointed path within the grand architecture of the cosmos. The sheep and goats that graze upon the sparse thornbush of the hillside move with a slow, deliberate rhythm, undisturbed by the monumental events that have just unfolded upon the ridge above them. Returning to the standing stone for one final moment of quiet reflection, Jacob places his palm flat against the cool, oiled surface, feeling the slight irregularities of the ancient rock beneath his skin. The stone is solid, immovable, rooted deep within the geological strata of the hill, just as the promise given to him is rooted in the unchanging character of the God who spoke from the summit of the dream. He does not know how many years will pass before he sees this place again, nor does he know the long, winding path of trial, deception, labor, and reconciliation that lies before him in the distant pastures of Paddan Aram. He cannot foresee the decades he will spend working for his uncle Laban, the complex rivalries of his future household with Leah and Rachel, the quiet nights of guarding flocks beneath scorching suns and freezing desert moons, or the eventual, trembling return across the Jordan at Jabbok, where he will wrestle once more with the divine mystery in the darkness. All of that remains hidden behind the heavy curtain of the future, locked away in the wise reticence of the Almighty. With a final, lingering look at the glistening pillar, Jacob takes up his traveler's staff and turns his face toward the north. The path drops away from the crest of Bethel, winding down through the rocky defiles and scrub-covered hills toward the broad valleys that lead onward toward Samaria and the northern plains. The dust rises in a small, pale cloud around the hooves of the lead donkey as the little caravan begins to move, its pace measured and steady, perfectly attuned to the slow, enduring rhythm of the ancient world. The sun is now fully risen, flooding the landscape with a brilliant, unfiltered clarity that illuminates every stone, every bush, and every turn of the winding track, leaving no place for shadows to hide. Jacob walks with his head held high, his shoulders relaxed, feeling the strength of the earth beneath his feet and the quiet, steady presence of the heavenly watchers keeping pace with his slow, deliberate stride along the sunlit path of his long pilgrimage. The afternoon begins to soften its grip upon the stony hills of Luz, the harsh white glare of the midday sun giving way to long, stretching shadows that pool in the crevices of the limestone bedrock. Jacob feels the distinct change in the air, a sudden coolness that drifts down from the higher ridges of the central mountain range, whispering through the sparse, resilient scrub of juniper and dwarf oak that cling tenaciously to the dry earth. His feet, cased in simple leather sandals worn thin by the many miles traveled since leaving the protective tents of Beersheba, navigate the uneven terrain with the practiced ease of a man whose life has been measured by the rhythms of pasture and flock. Every step produces a dry, scraping sound against the flint and chalk, a steady, rhythmic percussion that matches the measured beating of his heart and the slow, deep inhalation of the mountain breeze. The landscape here is an ancient one, carved by centuries of winter torrents that rush through the wadis only to vanish entirely during the long, parched months of summer. It is a region of stark contrasts, where the pale grey of exposed stone meets the muted olive greens of ancient groves and the dusty ochre of sun-baked soil. As Jacob continues his steady ascent toward the high plateau, the distant bleating of sheep carried upward on the wind reminds him of the flocks he has left behind, of his father Isaac sitting quietly in the dimness of his tent in Hebron, and of the fierce, unyielding gaze of Esau that still seems to linger just at the edge of his memory. Yet, here upon the open ridge, surrounded by the vast and indifferent expanse of the Judean hills, those earthly anxieties begin to lose their sharp edges, dissolving slowly into the vastness of the horizon. The ground beneath him is strewn with innumerable stones, rounded by ancient elements and scattered across the slopes like the ruins of some forgotten city built by giants. These are the stones of the patriarch's land, the very foundation upon which generations have walked, tended their herds, and offered their quiet devotions to the God of Abraham. Jacob stoops occasionally, running a calloused palm over the cool, weathered surface of a particularly smooth boulder, feeling the quiet endurance held within its mineral heart. There is an ancient stillness in these highlands, a sense that time moves differently here, measured not by the hurried rushing of men or the petty rivalries of brothers, but by the slow, imperceptible shifting of the hills under the endless dome of the sky. The light of the declining sun begins to turn from gold to a deep, burnished amber, casting long fingers of shadow across the terrace slopes and painting the limestone cliffs in shades of rose and violet. The air carries the distinct, earthy scent of wild sage and crushed thyme, released from the low-growing bushes by the fading warmth of the day. It is a rich, grounding fragrance that settles deep into the fabric of Jacob's woolen tunic, wrapping him in the quiet perfume of the wilderness. He listens to the faint, whistling sigh of the wind as it braids itself through the stiff branches of the terebinth trees, creating a continuous, murmuring cadence that seems almost like human speech, though the words remain just beyond the reach of understanding. The path narrows as it winds upward between two massive outcrops of grey rock, forming a natural gateway that opens out onto a wide, gently sloping plateau at the summit of the ridge. This is the place known to the local Canaanite herdsmen as the Sanctuary of Luz, an ancient high place where stones have stood upright in silent circles for generations, marking the presence of unseen powers long before the tents of Abraham were ever pitched beneath the oaks of Mamre. The atmosphere here is noticeably different, heavy with a strange, expectant quietude that causes the hairs on the back of Jacob's neck to stir. The wind drops entirely for a brief moment, leaving the plateau in a profound, absolute stillness where the loudest sound is the soft rustle of Jacob's own garment and the steady, rhythmic intake of his breath. He stops near the center of the plateau, looking around slowly as his eyes take in the sweeping panorama of the surrounding hills, rolling away into the gathering dusk like waves of petrified sea. The sun is dipping lower now, touching the western horizon with a fiery brilliance that stains the clouds in brilliant bands of scarlet and gold, before sinking below the edge of the world and leaving behind a clear, luminous twilight. The shadows lengthen and merge, swallowing the valleys first, then creeping steadily up the steep flanks of the hills until only the very highest crests of the ridge catch the last fading rays of daylight. The world is darkening quickly, transitioning from the familiar colors of the day into the uniform, silvery gray of the Judean night. Jacob realizes that the journey must pause here, for traveling across these treacherous, boulder-strewn highlands after full dark is an invitation to disaster, where a single misstep can mean a broken limb in the absolute blackness of the ravines. He loosens the leather strap of his traveling pouch, letting it slip from his shoulder to the ground with a soft thud, and removes his heavy wooden walking staff, leaning it carefully against the rough surface of a large, flat-topped stone. His muscles ache with a deep, satisfying fatigue, the kind that comes from a long day of honest exertion under the open sky, and his bones feel heavy and warm as the adrenaline of the journey finally begins to recede from his limbs. He walks slowly across the plateau in the dimming light, searching for a place sheltered from the rising night wind that has begun to whisper once more across the exposed ridges. A few yards away, nestled against the natural curve of a low limestone ledge, lies a collection of smooth, weather-worn stones that have been gathered by the elements into a natural alcove. It is a humble resting place, exposed to the vast canopy of the heavens yet protected from the direct chill of the drafts sweeping down from the north. Jacob approaches the spot with the measured caution of a solitary traveler, his senses attuned to every subtle shift in the environment around him. Bending down, he begins to select a few of the smaller, more manageable stones from the immediate area, moving them one by one to create a level, slightly raised contour of earth and rock that might serve as a makeshift pillow for his weary head. The stones are cool to the touch, retaining the fading warmth of the afternoon sun beneath their surface, a comforting reminder of the earth's enduring strength. He arranges them carefully, testing the firmness and the angle with his hand until he finds a configuration that feels supportive and steady, a secure resting place for a man far from the familiar comforts of his mother's tent. Before lying down, Jacob stands upright for a long moment, stretching his arms toward the darkening sky as the first brilliant stars begin to puncture the deep indigo velvet of the firmament. The night sky over the hills of Canaan is a vast, unblemished dome, untouched by the artificial glows of later centuries, glittering with a diamond-like intensity that makes the heavenly bodies appear startlingly close, as if one might reach out and touch the hem of their eternal garments. He gazes upward into the endless depths of space, feeling the profound insignificance of his own solitary existence weighed against the staggering magnitude of the cosmos, yet experiencing no fear, only a deep, abiding sense of quiet wonder. The silence of the night deepens around him, broken only by the occasional distant cry of a jackal echoing up from the dark floor of the wadi below, or the soft rustle of a nocturnal creature moving through the dry brush at the edge of the clearing. The air grows noticeably cooler, forcing Jacob to pull his heavy woolen cloak more tightly around his shoulders, crossing the fabric over his chest to trap the fading warmth of his body. He takes a long, slow breath, smelling the clean, sharp scent of the night dew beginning to form on the sparse vegetation, and lets his shoulders drop completely, releasing the last lingering tensions of the day. With a quiet sigh, Jacob lowers himself to the ground, stretching his long frame out upon the hard, unforgiving earth beside the limestone ledge. He positions his head carefully upon the pile of stones he has arranged, adjusting his position slightly until his neck finds a comfortable rest against the cool, unyielding surface. It is a hard pillow by any measure, stark and Spartan, entirely unsuited for a man of wealth and standing, yet in this moment of utter vulnerability, it feels strangely right, grounding him completely to the physical reality of the soil beneath him. He crosses his arms over his chest, his fingers resting lightly against the rough wool of his garment, and stares straight up into the gathering constellations that wheel slowly across the vast expanse of the night sky. The Great Bear hangs suspended over the northern horizon, its ancient outline sharp and clear, while the gleaming points of the Pleiades cluster together like a handful of scattered diamonds upon black velvet. The steady, hypnotic rhythm of his breathing slows down further, matching the slow, majestic rotation of the heavens, easing him step by step across the threshold between waking consciousness and the deep, restorative realm of slumber. The weight of his eyelids increases with every passing heartbeat, the exhaustion of the long march finally overtaking the remaining currents of thought in his mind. The sounds of the wilderness fade into a soft, indistinct murmur, merging with the gentle whistle of the wind against the rocks until the external world begins to recede into a peaceful, shadowy haze. Yet, even as sleep claims his physical senses, the deeper currents of his spirit remain alert, hovering in that quiet, liminal space where the boundaries between the seen and the unseen grow thin and permeable. The stone beneath his head begins to feel strangely warm, radiating a soft, pulsing heat that spreads upward through the base of his skull and flows gently into his resting mind. The hard edges of the rock seem to soften, losing their mineral density and transforming into something fluid and receptive, like the smooth wood of an ancient harp or the warm hand of a trusted friend. Jacob does not stir, though he is dimly aware that the ordinary laws of the waking world are beginning to dissolve around him, replaced by a profound and enveloping stillness that heralds the approach of something vast and extraordinary. The darkness of the night above the plateau seems to deepen, shifting from the familiar blackness of the Judean sky into an intense, velvety void that stretches infinitely upward, cleansed of every cloud and dust mote. And then, slowly, out of the very center of that heavenly expanse, a faint, silvery illumination begins to manifest, not cast by any star or moon, but welling up from some hidden source far beyond the farthest reaches of the visible cosmos. It is a light that does not dazzle or blind, but rather clarifies, revealing dimensions of the night that have always been present, hidden just behind the fragile veil of mortal perception. Across the broad surface of the plateau, the ordinary stones and jagged outcrops take on a strange, translucent quality, glowing from within with a soft, pearlescent radiance that casts no shadows. Jacob's breathing becomes imperceptibly shallow, his body sinking deeper and deeper into the bedrock as if the earth itself were welcoming him into its deepest, most sacred chambers. The air grows thick with an unearthly fragrance, not of earthly flowers or crushed herbs, but of something ancient and pristine, reminiscent of the first morning of creation before dust had ever settled upon the waters. Directly above the resting place where Jacob lies with his head upon the stones, the fabric of the night sky parts entirely, rolling back like the heavy wool curtains of a tent to reveal an aperture of pure, dazzling brilliance that reaches from the very ground where he rests up to the absolute throne of the heavens. It is a structure of breathtaking scale and majesty, a vast stairway or ladder of shimmering light whose base is planted firmly upon the solid rock of Luz, while its uppermost rungs lose themselves in the blinding, unapproachable glory of the divine presence. The rungs of this celestial ascent pulse with a steady, living rhythm, shifting through hues of amber, sapphire, and purest white, casting a gentle, shimmering glow across the entire landscape of the sleeping hills. The sheer immensity of the vision fills Jacob's inner vision with an overwhelming sense of awe that is entirely devoid of terror. He watches, suspended in the quiet wonder of the dream state, as the full reality of the heavenly highway reveals itself to his spiritual sight. The sides of the ladder are forged from beams of living light, woven together with strands of pure energy that hum with a faint, resonant chord, like the deepest string of a massive lyre vibrating in harmony with the rotation of the spheres. Every step of the ascent is marked by a soft, luminous flare, tracing a path that bridges the unfathomable chasm between the dust of the earth and the infinite heights of the celestial realm. And upon this magnificent structure, movement begins. Down from the blinding radiance of the upper heights, figures of breathtaking presence and power start their descent along the glowing rungs. They move with an effortless grace that defies the mechanics of physical weight, their forms shifting between the likeness of winged men and pillars of pure, concentrated flame. Their garments appear woven from spun starlight, trailing delicate wisps of luminance that linger in the air like smoke from an altar fire. Their faces are serene, fixed in expressions of absolute focus and loving intent, untouched by the turmoil or sorrow of the mortal world below. Jacob observes them as they pass close to where he lies, their footsteps producing no sound upon the glowing rungs, yet sending delicate ripples of warmth through the surrounding air. They descend in a continuous, orderly procession, rank upon rank, their numbers countless as the grains of sand upon the shore or the stars in the winter sky. Some carry instruments of divine agency that look like scrolls of woven fire, while others hold their hands crossed over their chests in gestures of perpetual adoration. They are the messengers of the Most High, the celestial host assigned to superintend the affairs of the earth, moving between the heavenly council and the dusty pathways of men with the precision of well-tended stars. The variety among the descending and ascending watchers is staggering to behold. Some possess the traditional human countenance, radiant with a wisdom that spans millennia, while others bear the ancient, symbolic forms of the cherubim and seraphim, creatures of multifaceted vision and burning devotion whose very presence speaks of the unapproachable holiness of their source. They pass one another upon the glowing rungs with perfect coordination, those descending bringing the decrees, protection, and life breath of the heavens down to the waiting earth, while those ascending carry the silent prayers, the unuttered sighs, and the hidden tears of suffering humanity back up to the footstool of the Almighty. The movement upon the ladder is ceaseless, an endless river of light and spirit flowing in both directions simultaneously, bridging the eternal silence between the Creator and His creation. Jacob feels the immense current of their passing wash over him like a gentle, warm tide, carrying away the residue of his fears, his deception of his brother, his hurried flight from Beersheba, and his deep, gnawing loneliness. In the presence of this heavenly host, his individual identity expands, merging for a brief, transcendent moment with the vast tapestry of the divine covenant that stretches from his grandfather Abraham through his father Isaac and onward into an unwritten future. He notices that the watchers do not merely pass over the earth and return, rather, their gazes frequently sweep across the landscape of Luz, pausing with a look of profound, personal recognition upon the very stone where Jacob rests his head. It is as if this specific place, this unpretentious clearing among the rocky hills, has suddenly become the focal point of all heavenly activity, the central pivot upon which the great wheel of divine purpose is turning. The watchers seem to regard Jacob not as an insignificant fugitive hiding from an angry brother, but as a crucial waypoint in a grand narrative that has been ordained before the foundations of the world were laid. The sheer volume of their movement creates a low, resonant vibration that fills the entire atmosphere, a continuous, harmonious hum that resonates within Jacob's bones, synchronizing his heartbeat with the eternal pulse of the cosmos. It is a sound of absolute peace, completely devoid of discord or urgency, carrying the assurance that behind the chaotic facade of human history, an unerring order is being maintained by hands too vast for mortal comprehension. The cold night air is completely replaced by a pervasive, enveloping warmth that radiates from the base of the ladder, turning the rocky plateau into a sanctuary of divine comfort. As Jacob watches the endless stream of light and presence flow up and down the luminous rungs, the very summit of the ladder parts further, rolling back to reveal a presence so brilliant, so overwhelmingly radiant, that even in the protective realm of the dream, Jacob's spiritual eyes must squint against the intensity. From that unapproachable center of light, a voice emerges, not as sound traveling through the air, but as a direct, resonant thought that forms itself instantly within the chambers of Jacob's consciousness, echoing with a depth and authority that shakes the very bedrock of the earth beneath him. The voice is both ancient and immediate, carrying the weight of the Creator of the ends of the earth, yet imbued with a personal, intimate warmth that calls Jacob by his name even before the words are formally spoken. It is the voice that spoke to Abraham beneath the terebinths of Mamre, and that whispered to Isaac in the quiet valleys of the Negev, now descending the luminous ladder to establish its unbroken continuity with the third generation of the covenant family. The sound of it washes over Jacob's soul like oil upon troubled waters, stilling every remaining doubt and filling the vast spaces of his mind with an absolute, undeniable certainty. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac, the voice proclaims, the words vibrating through the very substance of the stone beneath his head and resonating within every fiber of his sleeping form. The ground on which you lie, this unpretentious patch of limestone and dust, this barren hilltop of Luz, I will give to you and to your descendants. They shall be like the dust of the earth, spreading out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south, an innumerable host that shall carry the seed of promise into the far corners of the world. The vision expands as the words unfold, showing Jacob a sweeping vista of future generations spreading out across the hills and valleys of Canaan, pitching their tents, building their homes, and cultivating the terraced slopes long after his own bones have returned to the dust of Hebron. He sees fields of golden grain waving in the summer wind, vineyards clinging to the stony hillsides, and stone hearths sending up thin wisps of smoke into the clear morning air, all springing from this single, solitary moment of encounter upon the high plateau. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The divine declaration continues, rolling down the ladder in waves of pure, uncreated light that wash over the sleeping patriarch with the force of an ocean tide. The promise made to Abraham beneath the starry sky of yore, and reaffirmed to Isaac during the years of famine, now anchors itself deeply within the spirit of the fugitive son, transforming his flight into an expedition of destiny and his isolation into an appointment with the Almighty Himself. The voice does not end with the sweeping panorama of nations and centuries, but narrows its focus with tender, breathtaking intimacy to address the immediate, trembling reality of the man lying alone upon the stones. And behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. The words settle over Jacob like a mantle of impenetrable armor, sealing out the threats of Esau, the uncertainties of the long road ahead, and the haunting fear of abandonment that has shadowed his footsteps since he stepped outside the safety of his mother's tent. The divine pronouncement hangs in the luminous air, sustained by the steady, radiant presence of the heavenly host still ascending and descending the rungs of the glowing ladder. Jacob feels a profound, irreversible shift occur within the deepest core of his being, the nervous, calculating nature that has characterized his youth, the grasping at heels, the hurried bargains, the constant scheming for security, begins to dissolve, burned away by the pure, unmerited grace of the divine assurance. He is no longer a man striving desperately to secure his own future through cleverness and deceit. He is a man held, protected, and guided by the sovereign architect of the cosmos. The light at the summit of the ladder flares with a brilliant, final pulse of pure white radiance, sending a warm wave of peace across the entire plateau. Before the blinding aperture begins slowly to close, the heavy curtains of the night sky drawing back together with a gentle, whispering sigh that echoes through the hills of Luz. The heavenly host ascends in an orderly, reverent procession, their glowing forms fading gradually into the deep indigo depths of the firmament until the last traces of their luminance melt away into the familiar stars of the Judean night. The ladder itself recedes, its rungs of fire dimming from amber to rose, and finally dissolving back into the solid, unyielding reality of the limestone bedrock upon which Jacob's head is resting. The silence that returns to the plateau is heavy, profound, and absolute, vastly different from the ordinary stillness of the wilderness. It is a charged, sacred quiet that feels almost tangible, as if the very air has been consecrated by the passing of heavenly feet. The darkness of the pre-dawn hours has settled over the hills once more, but the quality of the night has changed entirely for the solitary sleeper. The cold wind has ceased its whistling, and a strange, gentle warmth still radiates upward from the stone pillow, keeping the chill of the desert night at a safe distance from his resting body. For a long time, there is no movement upon the plateau, only the deep, rhythmic breathing of Jacob as he remains suspended in the rich, restorative depths of profound slumber, his mind slowly integrating the staggering reality of the vision he has just witnessed. The stars above continue their majestic, unhurried march across the dome of the sky, wheeling slowly toward the western horizon as the first subtle hints of pale gray begin to dilute the deep blackness of the eastern peaks. The night is drawing toward its close, preparing to yield its authority to the grey light of a new dawn that will break upon a man who has gone to sleep as a fugitive and is about to wake as a prince of the divine covenant. Slowly, The tension in Jacob's physical body begins to release further, his fingers uncurling from their tight grip against his chest, his jaw relaxing as the last remnants of nocturnal anxiety are swept away by the memory of the voice that declared, "I will not leave you." His dreams quiet down into a seamless, peaceful blankness, a deep well of rest provided by the Creator to prepare his physical frame for the momentous awakening that awaits him just as the first rays of the morning sun begin to brush the highest peaks of the Judean ridge with fire. The horizon in the east transforms from slate gray to a pale, luminous rose, casting long, translucent fingers of light across the sleeping hills and driving the shadows back into the deepest recesses of the wadis. The chill morning air stirs briefly, carrying the crisp, clean scent of dew-drenched earth and wild sage across the wide plateau of Luz, brushing gently against Jacob's forehead and fluttering the edges of his woolen cloak. Deep within the architecture of his sleep, the first stirring of waking consciousness begins to ripple through his mind, a slow, floating ascent from the depths of profound rest back toward the familiar shores of the waking world, carrying with it the lingering, golden resonance of a ladder reaching up to heaven. The cool air of the early dawn begins to stir across the stony plateau of Luz, brushing against Jacob's eyelids and carrying with it the faint, crisp scent of wild thyme and limestone dust that has settled over the hills during the quiet hours of the night. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid lines of the landscape reclaim their shape out of the retreating shadows, as the deep indigo of the pre-dawn sky softens at the very edges into a pale, bruised violet, and then into the palest amber near the eastern horizon. His limbs feel heavy, weighted by a profound and restorative exhaustion that seems to have soaked deep into his bones, anchoring him to the earth even as his thoughts continue to drift lazily along the borderland between the dream and the waking hour. For a long moment, he does not move, unwilling to disturb the deep quiet that settles within his chest, preferring instead to keep his eyes closed against the brightening light and simply feel the solid, cool contour of the stone beneath his head, that improvised pillow which had somehow transformed during the night into the cornerstone of a sanctuary. Around him, the rugged wilderness of the central hill country slowly re-emerged from the dark, its contours defined by terraced ridges of grey limestone and scattered thickets of dwarf oak and terebinth trees that cling stubbornly to the rocky slopes. This was a land of ancient pathways, a high watershed route known to generations of nomadic herdsmen and traveling merchants as the Way of the Patriarchs, a dusty spine of ridges running north and south through the heart of Canaan, connecting the high pastures of Hebron and the well-watered valleys of the north. Long before Jacob laid his head upon this spot, this high place was known to the Canaanite inhabitants of the region as Luz, a name perhaps derived from the almond trees that dotted its rocky hollows, trees that burst into delicate white and pink blossoms during the early spring rains, filling the mountain air with a subtle, sweet perfume. But to the nomadic tent dwellers who pastured their flocks upon these slopes, such high places were often regarded with a mixture of reverence and cautious trembling, for the ancient Canaanites believed that the high limestone crags and elevated plateaus were the natural dwelling places of local deities, numinous thresholds where the veil between the earthly realm and the divine assembly was remarkably thin. Yet as Jacob opens his eyes at last and gazes up into the pale, widening expanse of the morning sky, the landscape feels utterly transformed, stripped of any lingering dread and replaced by an abiding, luminous stillness. The sky above is vast and clear, washed clean by the night breeze, and the harsh limestone rocks that litter the ground no longer appear as mere obstacles in a hostile wilderness, but rather as the quiet foundation stones of a place touched by heaven. He shifts his weight slightly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles and the cool touch of the morning dew that has gathered on the hem of his traveler's tunic, collecting in tiny, glistening droplets upon the coarse wool. He pushes himself up from the ground, resting his weight on one hand while his fingers brush against the surface of the stone where his head had rested through the long hours of the vision. The stone is cool, damp with the moisture of the dawn, completely solid and ordinary to the touch, yet to Jacob's heightened senses, it radiates an unspoken weight, as if it still held the memory of the immense pressure and glory that had rested upon it while the heavens were opened wide. He sits there for a long time in the gathering light, watching the first direct rays of the sun crest the distant hills of Moab across the deep rift of the Jordan Valley, painting the upper clouds in brilliant strokes of rose and gold. The silence of the morning is absolute, save for the occasional, solitary call of a rock partridge echoing across the wadi below and the soft rustle of a desert breeze stirring the dry leaves of a nearby bush. In this quiet isolation, the events of the night do not fade like ordinary dreams that dissolve at the first touch of sunlight. Rather, they stand sharper, more vivid than the waking world around him, etched permanently into the landscape of his mind. He remembers the vast, descending and ascending presence of the messengers upon that celestial stairway, the steady, rhythmic measure of their movement, and above all, the voice that spoke from the blinding radiance at the summit, the voice that echoed his grandfather Abraham's ancient promise and extended it directly, personally, unconditionally to him, the fugitive fleeing from the bitter wrath of his twin brother. The memory of Esau's face, dark with suppressed rage and the bitter sting of betrayal, flashes briefly through his mind, but it lacks the sharp, terrifying edge that it carried when he slipped away from his father's tents in Beersheba days ago. The panic that had driven his frantic footsteps northward, the desperate, breathless flight across the rugged hills, looking over his shoulder for the avenging shadow of his brother or the armed retainers of his clan, has been replaced by a strange, unshakable calm. He realizes now, with a quiet, mounting certainty, that he had not stumbled upon this lonely ridge by mere chance or unfortunate exhaustion as the sun sank below the western horizon. Even when he was plotting in the shadowed tents of his mother Rebekah, or when he stood before his blind, frail father Isaac receiving the coveted blessing disguised in his brother's garments, the invisible threads of destiny had been drawing him inexorably toward this exact patch of stony earth, this unremarkable hill outside the Canaanite town of Luz. With a slow, deliberate movement, Jacob stands up to his full height, stretching his arms toward the brightening sky, feeling the blood return to his limbs and the full measure of his physical strength settling back into his frame. He looks down at the stone upon which he had slept, the singular rock that had served as his bolster through the long hours of the night. In the ancient Near Eastern world of the second millennium before the Common Era, setting up a sacred stone, a masbar, was a deeply significant and common religious act among both the Semitic nomads and the sedentary populations of the Levant. Such standing stones were erected to mark treaties, to commemorate covenants, or most frequently, to bear witness to an epiphany, a tangible encounter between mortal men and the unseen divine powers that governed the cosmos. These stones served as permanent anchors of memory in a shifting, transient landscape, visible reminders to anyone who passed by that this particular spot of earth was consecrated, set apart from the common use of the wilderness. Kneeling beside the stone, Jacob takes hold of it with both hands, testing its weight, and with a grunt of exertion, he lifts it from the depression in the earth where it had rested for centuries. He drags it upward, shifting it until it stands firmly upright on its narrow base, a solitary pillar rising toward the heavens like a silent sentinel marking the threshold of eternity. In the pale morning light, the upright stone casts a long, sharp shadow across the dusty ground, pointing steadily toward the west as the sun climbs higher into the azure vault of the sky. The act of raising the stone requires focus and physical labor, grounding the sublime majesty of his nocturnal vision into the heavy, tangible reality of the earth. It is a concrete declaration that what happened here was no fleeting illusion of the exhausted brain, but a fixed historical reality, an event anchored in time and space that will shape every step of his journey from this day forward. Next, Jacob searches the surrounding rocky slope for smaller stones, gathering them into a loose cairn around the base of the standing pillar to secure it firmly against the shifting winds and the erosion of the winter rains. He works with steady, unhurried concentration, his hands brushing against the rough, lichen-encrusted surfaces of the limestone fragments, stacking them carefully one upon another until the foundation is solid and secure. The physical labor provides a soothing counterpoint to the swirling thoughts within his mind, a way to channel the overwhelming awe of the divine encounter into simple, earthly craftsmanship. When the base is reinforced to his satisfaction, he straightens up, wiping the limestone dust from his palms onto his woolen tunic, and steps back to gaze at what he has created, a modest, unhewn monument standing quietly amidst the vast, indifferent expanse of the Judean hills. The sun is now fully cleared of the eastern horizons, bathing the rocky slopes in a warm, golden light that begins to drive away the chill of the morning, warming the surface of the standing stone until it radiates a subtle, ambient heat. Jacob reaches into his traveling pack, untying the leather thongs that secure his meager provisions, and retrieves a small skin flask of oil, the precious olive oil he had carried with him from his father's household for sustenance and anointing along the long, lonely road. In the ancient world, oil was a commodity of immense value, representing the richness of the earth, the labor of harvesting and pressing the silver-green fruit of the olive groves, and the very essence of festivity, healing, and consecration. To pour out oil upon a sacred stone was to offer the highest form of liquid tribute to the divine, an act of libation that signified the pouring out of one's own life and devotion into the hands of God, setting the object apart as holy and inviolable. He uncorks the flask, lifting it above the upright stone, and tilts it gently. A thick, golden stream of oil spills over the rough, weathered crest of the limestone pillar, glistening brightly in the morning sunlight as it catches the myriad facets of the stone. The oil spreads slowly downward, darkening the grey surface into a rich, amber hue, filling the morning air with the earthy, warm fragrance of pressed olives that mingles with the scent of wild herbs and dry earth. Jacob watches the liquid flow down the grooves and fissures of the rock, wetting every crevice, until it pools at the base among the smaller foundation stones he had gathered. It is a silent, reverent offering, performed without ritual formulas or priestly garments, enacted simply by a lonely fugitive in the vast emptiness of the wilderness, yet charged with an intimacy that surpasses the formal sacrifices of the great temples of Egypt or Mesopotamia. As the last drop of oil leaves the flask and sinks into the stone, Jacob bows his head, closing his eyes once more as a deep, profound wave of reverence washes over his soul. He names the place, speaking the words aloud into the quiet morning air, his voice steady and resonant in the open space. No longer will this desolate hill be known simply by its pagan Canaanite name of Luz, a designation bound to the local spirits and ancient superstitions of the conquered land. From this moment onward, the place shall bear a new name, a name forged in the fire of divine revelation and personal encounter: Bethel, the house of God. The word hangs in the air, rich with meaning, transforming the very geography of his journey. What was once a nameless, terrifying wilderness where he lay down to die with only a stone for his pillow has become the gate of heaven, the threshold where the divine and the human touch in unbreakable communion. Yet even as he speaks the name, a profound sense of sober responsibility settles upon him, tempering the exaltation of the vision with the realistic weight of human frailty. Jacob is well aware of who he is, a man whose very name, harvested from his birth as he grasped his twin brother's heel, carries the connotation of the supplanter, the trickster, the one who navigates life through cleverness, negotiation, and self-preservation. He remembers the deceptions in his father's tent, the sharp words, the stolen blessing, and the fractured relationships that lie behind him in Beersheba like broken pottery. Standing before the house of God, he feels the sharp contrast between the radiant holiness of the vision and the complex, flawed reality of his own character, realizing that an encounter with the divine does not instantly erase the habits of a lifetime, but rather places them under a searching, compassionate light that demands a response. He makes a vow, speaking the words quietly to the opened sky, formalizing the inward transformation of his heart into a deliberate covenant with the God who met him in the night. It is a vow that reflects the cautious, bargaining nature of a man who is still learning to trust, yet it also marks the first tentative step of a lifelong surrender. If God will indeed be with him, if he will guard him on this perilous journey that he is now taking, if he will provide him with bread to eat and clothing to wear so that he returns safely to his father's house in peace, then this Lord shall be his God, and this standing stone which he has anointed with oil shall truly become the house of God. And of all the substance, the flocks, the herds, and the wealth that God will surely grant him along the way, he promises to return a full tenth back to the source, acknowledging that nothing he possesses is truly his own, but rather a gift entrusted to him by the one who rules the heavens and the earth. The morning breeze grows warmer now, rustling the dry grasses of the hillside as the sun climbs higher into the zenith, casting short, sharp shadows beneath the rocks and bushes. The solitude of the dawn begins to give way to the faint, distant sounds of waking life from the nearby valleys, where shepherds are leading their flocks out to pasture and the smoke from early cooking fires begins to curl lazily above the hidden settlements of the land. Jacob knows he cannot linger here forever upon this sacred ridge. The road to Haran still stretches out before him for hundreds of miles, an arduous and dangerous journey across the scorching northern deserts and the rugged ranges of Syria, leading him toward an uncle he has never seen and a future shrouded in complete uncertainty. Yet the quality of his movement has utterly changed. He is no longer a desperate fugitive running blindly away from his past in blind terror. He is a pilgrim walking forward with a quiet, deliberate stride, carrying the memory of a golden ladder and the unshakable promise of divine presence etched into the very center of his consciousness. He gathers his traveling pack, slings it securely across his shoulder, and casts one final, lingering look back at the gleaming, oil-drenched pillar of Bethel standing tall and solitary against the backdrop of the Judean hills. The stone catches the midday sun, shining like a beacon of hope in the wilderness, a visible pledge that wherever his footsteps may wander across the vast, indifferent face of the earth, he is never truly alone, never truly abandoned to the mercy of fate. With a steady breath, Jacob turns his face toward the northern road, his sandals crunching softly against the limestone gravel as he steps out into the bright, unsparing sunlight, beginning the long descent down the rocky ridge toward the valley below, his mind still echoing with the quiet, majestic music of the messengers ascending and descending upon that invisible stairway that bridges the infinite distance between earth and heaven, a bridge that remains open, humming softly with the quiet pulse of eternity, even as the noisy world of men wakes up around him and the ordinary hours of the day begin to unfold across the ancient hills of Canaan, drawing him ever deeper into the mysterious, unfolding tapestry of his destiny, step by quiet step along the dusty, sunlit road where the dust rises in tiny, golden clouds around his feet, settling gently upon the stones in a world held safely within the palm of an unseen hand that guides the wandering heart toward home without ever letting go of the thread that binds the mortal soul to the vast, wheeling splendor of the starlit sky above, where the quiet voice still whispers through the silent air of the morning, promising that he will never leave nor forsake the one who learns to rest his weary head upon the bedrock of his grace, continuing onward through the dry ravines and over the green pastures where the white-fleeced sheep graze quietly beneath the wide, benevolent dome of the firmament, leaving behind the quiet house of stone to walk into the bright, unending promise of the day that stretches out endlessly before him like a golden road leading straight into the heart of peace. The morning air at Bethel was crisp with the clean scent of dew-drenched sage and limestone dust, carrying the faint, sweet fragrance of wild thyme that grew low and resilient among the fractured boulders of the Judean hills. Jacob stood for a long moment upon the crest of that high ridge, feeling the cool touch of the dawn breeze against his skin, a gentle contrast to the deep, abiding warmth that still settled in his chest. The great stone that had served as his pillow through the long, midnight hours of vision now rested upright, anointed with the glistening oil that he had poured across its weathered surface, a silent and enduring monument to the gate of heaven. The rising sun crested the distant hills of Moab in the east, casting long, amber rays across the terrace slopes and turning the dew upon the grass into countless tiny, trembling diamonds of light. Every shadow receded slowly, folding back against the ancient rocks like heavy linen being gathered up by unseen hands, leaving the landscape washed in a pale, golden clarity that seemed to touch every leaf and pebble with a quiet sanctity. He adjusted the strap of his traveling pack across his shoulder, the rough wool of his tunic brushing lightly against his arm as he took his first measured steps down the winding path that led away from the sanctuary of the pillar. The earth beneath his sandals felt firm and welcoming, a steady floor of ancient limestone and packed red earth that offered a comforting resistance with every stride. Around him, the hills began to awaken to the bright promise of the new day. A pair of desert larks rose suddenly from a clump of dry grass, their wings catching the morning light as they climbed upward in narrowing spirals, pouring out a cascading, liquid song that drifted down through the cool air like falling water. Farther down the slope, the bells of a distant flock of sheep sounded a soft, intermittent chime, a gentle, rhythmic peal that mingled with the rustle of dry oak leaves stirred by the passing breeze. The world felt vast and newly made, washed clean by the darkness of the night and illuminated by a light that carried no trace of haste or worry. As he walked, the heavy knot of apprehension that had weighed upon his spirit since the day he left his father's tents in Beersheba seemed to have dissolved entirely, replaced by a quiet, rhythmic certainty that matched the steady pace of his feet. He was no longer merely a fugitive fleeing the fierce anger of an offended brother, nor a solitary wanderer lost in the trackless expanses of a forbidding wilderness. He was a man watched over, accompanied through every waking moment and every sleeping breath by the vast, unseen presence that had leaned down from the infinite heights of the dream to speak his name. The memory of that towering ladder, with its endless tiers of light and the steady, unhurried movement of the messengers ascending and descending, lingered in his mind like a persistent, luminous afterimage, visible whenever he closed his eyes against the brightness of the sun. He could still feel the profound stillness of that place, the way the night had seemed to hold its breath while the voice of the Almighty echoed through the silent reaches of his soul, promising land and lineage and an unbreaking thread of grace that would stretch forward into the distant, unformed generations of the future. The path wound downward through a narrow ravine where ancient terebinth trees stretched their gnarled branches upward, casting dappled, shifting patterns of shade across the stony ground. The air beneath the canopy was several degrees cooler, smelling strongly of dark earth, damp bark, and the sharp, green scent of crushed leaves. Jacob walked slowly through the shadows, letting his hand brush against the rough, fissured bark of a passing trunk, feeling the ancient grain beneath his fingertips, a tangible connection to the long, patient life of the earth that grew and endured far beyond the fleeting spans of men. He thought of his grandfather Abraham, who had walked these very hills generations before, pitching his black goat-hair tents beneath the oaks of Mamre and building rough stone altars to the same invisible God who now walked beside the grandson on the road. The continuity of that journey felt solid and reassuring, like the stones of the hills themselves, rooted deep in a history that stretched back to the very dawn of time. He was a link in a great, unbroken chain, a traveler carrying a sacred trust wrapped quietly within the ordinary burdens of a journey. By mid-morning, the path broadened out into a wide plateau where the red earth was ploughed into shallow furrows by patient farmers waiting for the autumn rains, though now the ground lay baking and cracked beneath the mounting heat of the sun. The air shimmered slightly above the horizon, creating pale, dancing mirages that made the distant hills appear to float upon a sea of silver light. Despite the growing warmth, Jacob felt no fatigue. His limbs moved with an easy, unburdened grace, and his breath came slow and deep, filling his lungs with the dry, fragrant air of the high plateau. He passed a company of traveling merchants driving a string of pack mules laden with bales of purple dye and jars of aromatic spices from the north. They nodded to him in silent, weary acknowledgement as they passed, their faces darkened by the sun and crusted with the white salt of sweat, their heavy footsteps stirring up small clouds of pale dust that hung suspended in the still air for long moments before settling back to earth. Jacob watched them go with a quiet, compassionate eye, sensing the shared weariness of the road, yet feeling within himself an interior sanctuary of peace that the dust and heat could not touch. The hours drifted by with the quiet inevitability of a shadow lengthening across a sundial. Around noon, he sought the shade of a massive carob tree whose dense, dark foliage offered a cool, cavernous retreat from the glare of the vertical sun. He seated himself upon a flat limestone slab at the base of the trunk, unlacing his leather water skin and taking a long, slow draught of the cool water that tasted faintly of the clay jar in which it had been stored. The water refreshed his throat, bringing a momentary shiver of coolness through his frame. He opened a small leather pouch and partook of a simple meal of hard barley bread and a handful of dried figs, chewing slowly, savoring the natural sweetness of the fruit and the wholesome, earthy flavor of the grain. Around him, the countryside seemed to pause in the heavy stillness of the noon hour. Even the cicadas had quieted their rhythmic hum, leaving the air wrapped in a profound, listening hush that felt almost sacred, as if the entire creation were pausing to reflect upon the light of the morning. He leaned his head back against the rough bark of the carob tree, letting his eyes slip half-closed as he watched the play of sunlight filtering through the dense leaves overhead, casting tiny, dancing discs of gold upon the dusty ground at his feet. His thoughts drifted back to the small stone circle he had left behind at Bethel, imagining the white dust settling upon the anointed rock, the silence returning to the empty ridge where the heavens had opened so wide. He realized now that Bethel was not merely a geographic point on a map of stone and dirt, but a threshold that he carried within himself wherever his feet might wander. The God of Bethel was not bound to that single hilltop, nor confined to the sanctuary of the night. He was the companion of the road, the watcher in the daylight, the quiet presence that would walk beside him through the high passes of the mountains and the wide, sweeping valleys of the foreign land toward which he traveled. As the sun began its long, slow descent down the western half of the sky, casting lengthening shadows that stretched out like welcoming fingers across the fields, Jacob rose from his resting place and resumed his journey. The air grew perceptibly cooler, losing the sharp, oppressive edge of the noon heat and taking on the soft, caressing quality of late afternoon. The light changed from a brilliant, blinding white to a rich, golden hue that seemed to give every object a distinct and luminous presence. The limestone rocks along the path glowed with a warm, amber radiance, and the dry grass by the roadside looked like spun copper as the breeze rippled gently through its stalks. Every sound became sharper and more distinct, the distant barking of a guard dog at a hidden homestead, the crisp snap of a twig beneath his sandal, the steady, rhythmic breathing that accompanied his unhurried steps. He crossed the dry bed of a winter wadi where smooth, water-worn pebbles of gray and white lay scattered across the white sand, silent witnesses to the sudden, rushing torrents that would transform the dry ravine into a roaring river when the winter rains finally broke upon the hills. He stepped carefully from stone to stone, the cool air rising from the stony bed brushing against his ankles with a refreshing touch. Climbing up the opposite bank, he found himself upon a high ridge that offered a sweeping view of the country opening out before him to the north. The hills rolled away in great, undulating waves of green and gold, fading gradually into the hazy blue distance where the mountains of Ephraim rose to meet the vast, pale arch of the sky. It was a wide, ancient land, marked by the ancient pathways of patriarchs and shepherds, yet to Jacob it looked entirely new, bathed in the quiet, assuring light of the promise that had been spoken in the night. He walked on as the shadows deepened, the sky overhead shifting slowly from the clear, brilliant blue of the day to a soft, translucent amber tinged with delicate streaks of rose and violet along the western horizon. A flock of homeward-bound pigeons cut swiftly across the darkening vault, their wings whistling softly through the calm air before vanishing into the gathering dusk. The sense of evening began to rise from the earth, the rich, heavy aroma of damp soil, the sharp tang of cooling rock, and the subtle, sweet fragrance of night-blooming flowers opening their petals to the falling dew. Jacob felt a deep, pervasive tiredness settling gently into his muscles, not the painful exhaustion of anxiety or flight, but the sweet, natural fatigue of a journey well walked, a wholesome weariness that invited rest. He reached a sheltered grove of low-growing oak trees just as the first bright stars began to pierce the velvet dome of the eastern sky. The ground beneath the trees was soft with a thick carpet of dry leaves and needles, offering a natural couch that felt welcoming to his tired frame. He removed his traveling pack, placing it carefully beside a moss-covered stone to serve as a pillow, much as he had done the night before, though tonight there was no trembling in his hands, no cold knot of fear in his stomach. He knelt upon the earth, bowing his head in the quiet darkness, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude to the unseen presence that had guided his steps throughout the day, anchoring his spirit in a peace that surpassed all understanding. Rising slowly, he stretched out upon the soft earth, drawing his heavy woolen cloak tightly around his shoulders to ward off the chill of the desert night. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint, clean scent of earth and leaves. Above him, through the jagged silhouette of the oak branches, the stars shone with a brilliant, steady light, countless pinpricks of silver fire scattered across the infinite expanse of the heavens. They did not wheel in terrifying confusion, but moved in their ancient, orderly courses with a quiet, majestic rhythm that spoke of a universe held firmly in the palm of a loving hand. He watched them for a long time, listening to the faint, whispering rustle of the night breeze moving through the leaves overhead, a sound like a soft, continuous lullaby breathed by the invisible air itself. His eyelids grew heavy, the glowing canopy of stars blurring slightly at the edges into soft pools of light. The sounds of the world around him receded gently, the distant hoot of an owl from a neighboring ridge, the soft settling of the dry leaves beneath his cloak, the steady, rhythmic beat of his own heart slowing down to match the quiet pulse of the night. The memory of the golden ladder seemed to fold itself into the darkness, a comforting presence hovering just beyond the veil of sleep. The air remained cool and sweet, brushing against his forehead like the touch of a gentle hand. With every breath, the tension of the day drained further away, leaving his mind clear and calm, untroubled by the miles behind him or the unknown road that waited for the dawn. The stillness deepened, wrapping around him like a heavy, warm blanket of quietude. The earth held him securely in its embrace, the leaves whispered their low, continuous song, and the cool breeze drifted softly through the dark, resting upon his face, fading slowly, quietly, into the deep, unbroken peace of the night. And so the story rests here, for now. Thank you for spending this time with Easy Drift Sleep. If these stories help you find rest, a quick subscribe means a new one is always waiting for you. Sleep well. We will see you next time.